The poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the lark still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived that toss the sunset's glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow. In Flanders fields we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Please stand if you're able for the national anthem.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our songs command. With glowing hearts we see rise the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep us. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, as President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Guelph, it is my great honor and privilege to welcome you today to the University of Guelph's Service of Remembrance. If I could please ask that you silence any electronic devices for the duration of the service, that would be appreciated. Thank you. As we begin, let us acknowledge that the University of Guelph resides on the ancestral lands of the Attawandaron people, and more recently, the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also recognize the significance of the dish with one spoon covenant to this land, and offer our respect to the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors as we strive to strengthen our relationships with them. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging them reminds us of our important connection to this land where we learn and where we work. Again, welcome to our service of remembrance, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome especially to this place of remembrance, War Memorial Hall, built in 1924 through a community movement to remember those who served in the First World War. In the chapel where we lay the wreaths today are two facing tablets. One bears the names of students, faculty, and staff members who lost their lives in the First World War. The other commemorates those who died in the Second World War. Also in the chapel are two books of remembrance inscribed with the names of those who served in the armed forces during those world conflicts. Those books in the chapel and this building itself demonstrates how those events hit so close to home for so many people right here in Guelph. This morning we will hear from someone who bore witness to the impact of the Second World War on this campus. And on that note, I'd like to welcome Professor Mavis Morton from our Department of Sociology and Anthropology to introduce today's speaker.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Claire Alexander and President Baccarino for inviting me here today and giving me the opportunity to introduce our speaker, who happens to be my father, Ross Morton. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and I came to the University of Guelph in 2009. When my dad first learned that I would be joining the U of G family, he reminded me that the Morton family already had a bit of history and connection here. My grandfather, Will Morton, was an Ontario farmer, and he attended courses at the Ontario Agricultural College on occasion to learn about best farming methods. Then I was to learn that my dad also had the opportunity to learn and train at the University of Guelph. It is this experience as part of my dad's time with the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War II that he will speak briefly about today. It is my pleasure to introduce my father, Ross Morton, to offer a few reflections on his wartime training some 75 years ago in commemoration of this Remembrance Day ceremony. Thank you. Dad?
Good morning. I'd like to thank Claire Alexander and President Baccarino at the University of Guelph for inviting me here to participate in the Remembrance Day ceremony. I started the process of joining the RC, the Royal Canadian Air Force, as a 17-and-a-half-year-old farm kid in Kingston, Ontario. And some weeks later, I received instruction on a travel voucher by mail to report to Ottawa on December the 7th, 1942. And that was 1 year after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. As a farm kid in the Great Depression, I had never had a vacation, and I was nervous, I was frightened, and what I was being asked to do. A passing soldier who had served in the First World War and was now a lance corporal in the Veterans Guard of Canada noticed me and escorted me the rest of the way. In the earlier years, he had been a farm worker and was employed by my uncle, and I was friends with his daughters. The Ottawa train station at that time was downtown, and I was billeted in the impressive Chateau Laurier Hotel. Barrack life after that was kind of downhill. I underwent further training in the days that followed at the Sparks Street location, and I was told that my depth perception was faulty, and though I could not be a pilot, I'd be trained as a wireless air gunner. I was sent to number 5 Manning Pool in Lachine, Quebec for the paperwork, medicals, and uniforms, on to Queen's University for a 4-week math course. It was August 1943 when I arrived in Guelph and was billeted in Johnson Hall. There were 3 double-decker steel bunks in the room I shared, and when I looked out the window, all I could see was lovely farmland. Canada had been asked to provide trained personnel for the Allied Air Force, and between May 1940 and March 1945, more than 167 students from Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, as well as escapees from continental Europe were trained, including over 50,000 pilots at the 107 sites established across Canada. The Guelph Agricultural College was now number 4 wireless school under the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. It was also a school of cookery. There were 120 trainees in our course, 60 of them from Australia. We were divided into 4 classes, and the main subject was to learn Morse code. The wireless classroom had several rows of tables, and each chair position had a set of earphones and a sending key. At the front of the room was a desk and an instructor who was also equipped with a sending key and earphones. In some of my off-duty times, I boxed with the RC Padre at a sparsely equipped gym and was surprised that he was rather aggressive for a man of the cloth. There was an illuminated outdoor rink across the road from the boathouse, and we spent many fun-filled hours watching the Australians learn to skate. Our training continued at the St. Catharines Airfield, where we sent messages back to base in Morse code while flying in the Yale, Tiger Moth, and Norseman planes, and realized that static and wind and noise from the motor made transmission more difficult in the classroom. We returned to Guelph for a final exam. Then it was on to Mountain View Gunnery School. That was between Belleville and Picton, where I learned to operate a gun tour and to assemble a Brownie machine gun that was rapidly, even though it was scattered on all parts across the desk. And my logbook records that I fired 3,900 rounds of .303 ammunition. When I arrived in England, I was assigned to the Royal Air Force Operational Training Flying Units, and I flew in Wellingtons and Lancaster bombers. Our crew consisted of Canadians, a Welsh lad, an Australian, and a Londoner. I was on a brief leave in London prior to a posting to the Far East when the atomic bomb was dropped and the war ended. I was discharged at number 1 Manning Depot in Toronto on March the 9th, 1946, which was 7 weeks before I was 21 years of age. And that time I was too young to vote in a provincial or a federal election. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the responsive reading. The audience responses will be on the overhead screens, and I'd like to invite our readers to the lectern, please. We have Amber Hutchinson, Vice President of the Graduate Students Union Association, Graduate Students Association, Chelsea Mulvale, President of the Central Student Association, and Bill Laidlaw from the University of Guelph Alumni Association.
The following is an excerpt from For the Fallen by Lawrence Bignon. They went with song to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
The following is an excerpt from In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John McRae. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
This is an excerpt from Nelson Mandela's Nobel Peace Prize address. We speak here of the challenge of the dichotomies of war and peace, violence and nonviolence, racism and human dignity, oppression and repression, and liberty and human rights, poverty and freedom from want. This must be a world of democracy and respect for human rights, a world freed from the horrors of poverty, hunger, deprivation, and ignorance, relieved of the threat and the scourge of civil wars and external aggression, and unburdened of the great tragedy of millions forced to become refugees. Let the efforts of us all prove that Martin Luther King Jr. was not a mere dreamer when he spoke of the beauty of genuine brotherhood and peace being more precious than diamonds of silver or gold.
Ladies and gentlemen, a few words about the procession. During the next song, members of the procession will collect the Rose Bowl and wreaths and proceed to the chapel at the back of the hall to place them. As the wreaths are laid in the chapel, the Griffin singers will sing "The Angels Will Guide You Home" by Eleanor Daly. Some history, a little bit of history about our Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl was donated in memory of Royal Air Force Captain John Playford Hales, an Ontario Agricultural College OAC faculty member killed in France in 1918. The Rose Bowl will be carried to the chapel by his nephew, David Hales. The student wreath is carried by Graduate Student Association Vice President Amber Hutchinson and CSA President Chelsea Mulvale. The faculty and staff wreath is carried by Amit Khosla and Mavis Morton, and the alumni wreath is carried by graduates Heather Robinson and Bill Laidlaw. A fourth wreath will be carried by Howard Hall and Ross Morton on behalf of the Royal Canadian Legion of Guelph. Members of the campus police will lead the procession, and if I could ask when the procession begins, if you could please stand as you are able during the laying of the wreaths. Thank you.
The angels will
I could ask the audience to please stand as you are able for the last post. Thank you very much. Please be seated. The choir was absolutely beautiful. Yeah, did a great job. Thank you as well for the last post in Reveille. Lester Pearson was Prime Minister of Canada from 1963 to 1968. He was a scholar, he was a statesman, a soldier, and a diplomat. In 1957, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And I would suggest that his acceptance remarks then are still very appropriate today. This is what he said. Of all our dreams today, there is none more important, so hard to realize than that of peace in the world. May we never lose our faith in it or our resolve to do everything that can be done to convert it one day into reality. I would now like to invite forward Andrew Hyde, a member of the campus multi-faith team, to offer a reflection of peace.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Hyde, and I serve as just one of the chaplains over at the Multi-Faith Resource Team. It is an honor to bring you some words of peace on behalf of the diverse faith communities that make up that team, especially on this day that marks the 100 years since the Battle of Passchendaele. When is the last time that you broke something? Maybe it was something small, like a fingernail or a pencil. Maybe it was a window that you broke, or the screen on your smartphone. Doesn't that always make you mad when you break something a little more consequential? What if it was something really big? What if the thing that you broke was someone's heart, or a promise, or a relationship that was important to you? Something a little more intrinsic and profound. What if it was faith? Now, I don't mean faith in terms of religious belief or a sense of ultimate meaning. People are breaking and rebuilding and breaking and rebuilding that kind of faith all the time. That's how we grow and develop and mature. And we have those kinds of conversations over at Multi-Faith all the time, to which you are welcome. When I mean faith, I mean that kind of faith that acts as a certain type of trust. What if we break faith with someone who trusted us? John McCrae's famous Remembrance Poem takes on the voices of soldiers who gave their lives in the First World War, and in doing so, entrusted us with something precious and profound. We just read these words. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. And so we ask, what is this trust that those brave soldiers placed in us over 100 years ago? What faith did previous generations have in us that we are to hold precious and carry like a candle, lighting the way for those who come after? Were we trusted simply to remember them, to wear a poppy, to show up once a year at a ceremony like this? Were we trusted to pause and be still and show gratitude for acts of heroism and selflessness? Perhaps. McCrae's poem speaks of taking up the quarrel with the foe. So maybe the thing we are trusted to do is to stand up and continue the fight wherever tyranny raises its ugly head. And there might be some truth in that as well. But I want to suggest this morning something else in addition to that. Something that hinges on our understanding of us who die. It is one of the profound realizations of maturity to recognize that we all shall die at some point. We are all given, in the words of the poet Mary Oliver, one wild and precious life. And whether our lives have been touched by the ravages of war or not, we have all fought our share of battles over our lives. Whether to provide for our loved ones, or with mental illness, or for a fairer shake in this slanted world. What if the faith we're supposed to keep, what if the trust we're supposed to maintain is a covenant not just with the soldiers of the past, but with all of humanity, to create the kind of world where trust itself is possible? If ye break faith with all of us who die, we shall not sleep. Perhaps our obligation is not just to the fallen of past generations, but to all of us who make up humanity. Speaking of the divine light that we all hold as human beings, the late LGBTQ activist and civil rights leader James Baldwin wrote this in a 1964 photo essay titled "Nothing Personal." He writes, "For nothing is fixed forever and forever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them, because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails, lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out." Baldwin prophetically reminds us that we have a responsibility to past and future generations to sustain a world where holding each other in trust is possible. Only when we experience a world where we can trust. Trust our institutions, trust our employers, trust our neighbors and our very selves. Only then will we know what peace is. And so how do we do that? How do we build the kind of world where trust is possible? I want to lift up 3 little slogans, 3 hashtagable sentiments that might guide our way just a little bit. The first is from a pacifist remembrance campaign, and it says this: "To remember is to work for peace." Peace doesn't just happen. Progress is not on autopilot. Find the area on campus or in this community where you can work diligently and passionately with actual sweat from your actual brow for peace. The second is from the protest slogan that says, "No justice, no peace," as well as its corollary sentiment, "No justice," with a K and with a W, so that we might know peace. There is a cause and effect between justice and peace. They go hand in hand. We who have committed ourselves in a place like this to deep learning and to research, surely we can commit a portion of our education to growing our knowledge and our understanding of justice. The third is a teaching that shows up in all of the great faiths of the world. Love your neighbor. In the tradition that I'm part of, we read a story where someone asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And the response given through a story of a good Samaritan is that our neighbor is everyone. Not just the person beside me or the person I identify with or the person I get along with. We are all neighbors. And if we look, we can recognize the divine light that we each carry. If we can work for peace, if we can know justice, if we can love our neighbors, then I believe we will have gone a long ways to creating a world where trust is possible. And as we walk on this campus, as we serve in our community, as we remember and commemorate those who have given so much so that we could live as we do today, may we be people who risk enough to trust, who are trustworthy ourselves, so that we might awaken one day to a life marked by peace and justice for all people. Amen, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for those thoughtful and inspiring words and a powerful reminder of the importance of the connectivity that we show and have with those with us today, those who came before us and those who will continue to come into the years ahead. I want to thank everyone again for making the time to join us today as we remember those who served our country. It is through their sacrifices that we enjoy the freedom that we have today. There is one final song from the choir, and then there will be a formal procession out. You're welcome, of course, to remain in the hall to reflect and leave as you are ready. Thank you again, everyone, for participating in today's ceremony.